Good evening. Let's start off, since this is a great congressional event, let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll turn and face the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome this evening. My name is Troy Wayman. I'm the president and CEO of One Acadiana. As the regional voice of the business community in Acadiana, we are excited and honored to have this opportunity to host this business-focused congressional forum with 6 of our congressional candidates. For those of you who are not familiar with One Acadiana, we represent more than 850 businesses throughout our 9-parish region. We work with local partners and market the entire region externally to businesses and talent and serve as the central business organization or the Chamber of Commerce for Lafayette. A few folks I want to thank before we get started tonight. First of all, I want to thank the media for being here and for providing exposure to this event for those that couldn't be with us tonight. I want to especially thank the candidates for your willingness to be here and for the support of this event. It means a lot to our membership and our investors and to the public in general. Thank you very much for being here. To University of Louisiana and the staff of the Picard Center for hosting us. I want to thank, I haven't seen Dr. Savoy, but I want to thank Dr. Savoy and UL for being such great partners of One Acadiana, and they're always there for us, and they work with us on all of our economic development efforts and work with us a lot to make the area a better place. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank Dr. Pearson Cross, Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, for being our moderator this evening. Very quickly, before we get started, I want to let the audience know that right now, One Acadiana is focused on educating the public about elections this fall. We have 2 elections coming up, November and December. This event is evidence of that educational effort that we're putting on. We're also hosting ballot over breakfast events, 2 of them. The first is next Thursday, and it's to educate voters on the November 6th ballot, and the second will be November 29th in preparation for the December 8th ballot. Registration for both of those events can be found at oneacadiana.org/events. Without further ado, I want to turn this over to Dr. Cross to facilitate tonight's discussion. Dr. Cross?
Thank you, Troy. It's great to be here. I'm happy to be with each of you tonight to help facilitate this program, which I think is going to be wonderful. As it was mentioned, this is not your average forum. We've set up tonight's forum as a Jeopardy-style questionnaire. However, no points will be taken, and we don't have the catchy theme music. We're sorry about that. Questions submitted by you, the attendees, were taken into consideration. Well, here's how it's going to work. Beginning with introductions, each candidate will have 1 minute to introduce themselves and make opening remarks. After introductions, we'll go directly into 3 rounds of questions. The candidate will choose a question from the board. They will have 2 minutes to answer. There will be 3 rounds of questions. The categories are the economy, infrastructure, education and the workforce, national security, and potpourri. Once a question has been used, it is no longer in play. However, each candidate is allowed 1 rebuttal to address a question answered by another candidate. Additionally, if a candidate is directly challenged by another candidate, that candidate will be given a chance to respond. Then, to shake things up, 2 questions on the board will be designated as a daily double. All candidates will be given the chance to respond to the daily double questions, 1 minute per candidate, starting with the candidate who selected the question. The candidate will also have 1 minute to close after all the others have addressed that question. After 3 rounds of question, we then move into a lightning round. Quick response questions. Each candidate will have 10 seconds to respond to each lightning round question. Are you getting all this? Okay, good. Candidates, any questions before we begin? I would encourage you to speak into your microphone, though, so make sure that if you need to adjust your microphone, now would be the time to make sure that your audience will hear what you're going to say. We'd like to remind the audience to silence their cell phones, if you would. That would be great. And our timekeeper tonight is going to be one Acadiana's Keeley right there, and she's going to hold up some signs for you as you talk. Can show them the most important one, the stop sign. Okay. When you see that, please quit talking. Thank you. We love to hear from you, but all right. Well, it's time for if there are no questions, it's time for the introduction, and Mr. Rob Anderson, we're going to start with you. 1 minute for an introduction.
Excellent. Is the microphone on? I can't tell from here.
No, I don't hear it. There you go.
Now it's on. I just turned it on. How's that? Woo. Okay, not so close. Hi, my name is Rob Anderson, as the sign says, and as Pearson said. I am the working class candidate. I am a first-time politician. I have never done this before, so this is freaking me out a little bit. I have been a home builder and a driller and a printer and many other things. I've been in the working force for 35 years. And it's come to the point where I have noticed all of the corruption, no dig at our incumbent, of course, in Washington, the corporate money buying our politicians, so to speak. And I wanted to run a grassroots campaign of just a regular person running by the people, for the people, so that we actually have a voice in Washington. And that is literally why I am here. I've been married for 28 years. My wife is here in attendance. I have 2 kids one is an engineer and one is in his senior year to become an engineer. And since I only have 1 minute, that's about it.
Mr. Andrus?
Hi, my name is Aaron Andrus. I'm the Libertarian Party candidate. I was born and raised here in Southwest Louisiana in a small town about 20 miles southeast of Lake Charles. I graduated high school from Bell City. It's a small school with 27 people. In 1991, attended McNeese State University, and I have a BS in finance. Graduated in 1996, and then, excuse me, I attended Loyola University in New Orleans and have a master in pastoral studies. And right now I am in the accelerated MBA program here at ULL, which is kicking my butt, but otherwise I decided to run because I think we need a libertarian voice in Washington.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Guillory?
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Cross, and thank you to One Acadiana for putting on this forum. Again, my name is Josh Guillory, and I'm running for Congress out of our district, the 3rd Congressional District, and I'm running for many reasons, one of which is that our district deserves to have in Washington what we once had, and that is a true and adequate voice. We're represented by a congressman, and respectfully, who doesn't live in our district, and with all due respect, Congressman, I do disagree with that. I'm your neighbor. I love this district. It's my home. I live in Youngsville with my wife and children. I'm a small business owner, family law attorney. For many years, I've been involved in the community as a volunteer middle school football coach. I'm proud and humbled to be an Army veteran. I served in Iraq in 2005 as a cavalry officer. And as our congressman, I will fight vigorously to balance the federal budget, secure funding for key infrastructure projects within our district, protect our coast, and bring back the economic engine we once had in this district. I humbly ask for your support on November 6th, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guillory. Mr. Higgins?
Pearson, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what's uplifting about this gathering is the fact that we're all solid Americans. By virtue of the fact that you're here means you're paying attention. And a forum of this nature, as we look at the peaceful transition of power amongst the sovereign states for 240 years, it's very much reflective of who we are and what we are as Americans. So I'm uplifted by the fact that I'm joined before you by Americans that love Louisiana and our country and our fellow man. I look forward to a vigorous and healthy discussion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Ms. Methvin?
Good evening. My name is Mimi Methvin. I'm a Democrat running for Congress, and I'm a lawyer and a private mediator. I worked my way through Georgetown Law School working for a congressman. So I spent 3 years in the Cannon House office building and working hard for constituents in the 8th Congressional District. I came back to Louisiana, worked as a federal prosecutor, and then at age 30, I was appointed United States Magistrate Judge here in Lafayette. And I was reappointed to that job 3 times. I presided over civil and criminal cases and learned to love mediation with the process of bringing parties together to find common ground and solve problems. I left that job in 2009 to start a private mediation company and return to the practice of law. I want to bring to Washington my skills as a mediator and my ability as an advocate to fight for policies that will work for average people in Louisiana and not just special interests.
Thank you, Ms. Smithson. Mr. Thomas?
Hello, my name is Verone Thomas. I'm a Navy veteran and local businessman from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I'm running for Congress to bring back the prosperity that we've lost along the wayside. We cannot continue to ignore the issues that Louisiana must face in order to revive the vitality of our economy. We need policies that have longevity and a permanent perpetual effect that will benefit many generations in the future. Basically, we do not need any more Band-Aids. We need real legislative actions that are concrete, because the opulence and the results we're looking for will not make itself available until we direct responsibilities to elevate all of our aspirations. So, it is my unequivocal endeavor to commission myself daily to put more focus on all the issues that affects our state. I'm number 26 on the ballot, and I appreciate your support. November 6, 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. If I could say, it's pretty loud, so if you just back off a little bit, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Back it just a little bit. We want to hear your message, though. Thank you. Okay, well, we're ready. We've heard the introductions. Now we're going to head into round 1. Once again, the categories: the economy, infrastructure, education and the workforce, national security, and potpourri. Let's get started with the first round of questions. The first question goes to Mr. Andrus.
Okay, I'll take the economy.
The economy for Q1, Q2, Q3?
Oh, okay, Q1.
Q1. Recognizing the need to diversify our economy, what emerging industries should we focus on, and what steps can Congress take to help them grow?
Okay, well, the LNG projects in Lake Charles are definitely a plus that are occurring right now for the area. And they're also talking about a maritime highway between Lake Charles and Houston through the port of Lake Charles. There's a meeting on November on that. So besides that, I don't know.
You do have 2 minutes for these
2
questions.
minutes? Okay.
2 minutes for
I
these
thought it was
questions,
one.
so. You don't have to use it.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. We turn to Mr. Guillory. Which question would you like?
All right, let's go with infrastructure for Q5.
Q5, infrastructure.
Can you hear me?
How will you work to protect existing funding streams and secure the billions of additional dollars needed to fully fund Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan?
Well, let's first start off with recognizing how important protecting our coast is. You know, it's my understanding, we're losing over a football field a day, and that should be an effort. This should be something we should all celebrate. I mean, if this is not a Republican issue, this is not a Democrat issue, this is an American issue, this is definitely a Louisiana issue. I know in our delegation, it starts off with one, partnering within our own. We have two members of our delegation, with Cedric Richmond and Steve Scalise, that has leadership positions in Congress. As a freshman congressman coming in, I would like to partner with them first, because they know the issues, they know the area, they know how important and vital our coast is, and we can use them to help navigate those waters, no pun intended, and through Washington. It also takes a partnership. It takes a partnership with local leaders, local business leaders, police juries, city council meetings, city council members, and an adequate and effective dialogue between our federal rep and our local leaders, and that's what I'll bring when I go to Washington.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Higgins, which question would you like?
Economy, second question, please.
Economy, second question. Do you support President Trump's tariff policies?
I've been deeply engaged with the executive branch, including personal conversations with the president since he announced steel and aluminum tariffs in March. Our office has probably had, I would say, in hundreds of hours of meetings regarding this topic. There's is an amazing and extensive endeavor. For decades, and you can't blame this on one administration that passed or before, but over the course of many decades, we have allowed, as a nation, as a people, we've allowed other nation states to take advantage of our trade agreements internationally. This has been something that virtually every candidate has campaigned upon, and now we have a president that's courageous enough to actually address it. It requires patience. It requires negotiating from a position of power and authority. This has happened. We've renegotiated the NAFTA agreement to bring a more level playing field to America, to American industry, American business. Our overall support for the president is profound, and we recognize his objective to reestablish fair trade for American business and industry and American citizens amongst the many trade agreements that it's the executive branch's responsibility to establish, or in this case, reestablish. So regarding tariffs specifically, I've had so many meetings with stakeholders and Americans impacted. It has required a great deal of patience. I'm ready for it to end. I'm ready for the new norm of America winning. And again, when a level playing field exists, America wins. So I hope that answers your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Ms. Methvin, you're next.
Thank you. I'll take economy Q3.
Q3. Recognizing the need, oops, that was question 1. Here we go. How do you feel about the lawsuits filed by various coastal parishes against the oil and gas industry over coastal erosion?
Well, thank you for that question. You're asking an attorney. I believe that what we learned in kindergarten is that you should take responsibility for the harm that you do. The coastal lawsuits are simply to ask the oil and gas industry to step up and take responsibility for their part, not all of the problems that we have on our coast, but the approximately 30% of the responsibility that they have for not complying with their permits, for basically cutting through our wetlands, allowing saltwater intrusion. And there's no real controversy about the damage and how it happened. The question is, wouldn't it be better for oil and gas companies to step up, accept responsibility, and basically settle these lawsuits? It would save time, it would save money, and it would put them in the position of accepting responsibility, and I think it would be a great PR move for them as well. Our coastal issues are the most critical issue that Louisiana faces. So when we're asked about infrastructure, economy, any question that is at the heart of what Louisiana faces right now, it all goes back to water and how we're having to deal with a loss of a tremendous amount of our coast. All over the district, as I go speaking to people about this problem, especially elected officials, they are struggling with problems that they never had to deal with before. And so I think all of us taxpayers are going to be required to come to the fore, but also I think the oil and gas companies should accept their responsibility and help us solve the problems.
Thank you, Ms. Methvin. Mr. Thomas, what would you like to select?
I'm going to go for infrastructure. Let me get question number 3.
Question number 3. President Trump campaigned on making major investments in American infrastructure. Should infrastructure investment be a top priority? If so, would you support an increase in the federal gas tax?
Well, I believe that the infrastructure right now is very critical in our whole country, especially in Louisiana. We're seeing our streets very congested. In Lafayette, they're talking about the I-49 connector, and then you see the roads, you see the potholes, and you see basically around the country, our infrastructure is crumbling. So we should definitely invest in our infrastructure. And I believe that what we have to do is we have to look at what we're good at. And we're good at transporting and moving products, people around in Louisiana. So I believe that we need to get rid of our old rail system and bring in what I call the Hyperloop. Now, some of y'all might have heard Hyperloop. It's really my idea I came out with in 2011 that Elon Musk claimed that's his in 2013. But yes, I came up with the Hyperloop. And I believe that if we put a port in Lake Charles, Lafayette, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans, we can move people and product around a lot quicker, and we can also relieve some of the congestion on the streets, and that gives us time to fix the streets and upgrade our infrastructure for what the future is going to be calling for travel. Because right now I see our travel going into your hover cars, your drone cars, those type of things. I believe that the future is there for us, and we got the technology, and we got to take advantage of it. So that's my, I believe that we should do everything in our power to invest in infrastructure. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. And then we return to Mr. Anderson.
Okay, stick with infrastructure. Let's go to the first question.
Question 1, what is the most pressing infrastructure need in the 3rd Congressional District, and how will you work to address it? And by the way, this is a daily double, so the way this is going to work is that everybody gets a minute right now, all the way down. We'll start with Mr. Anderson, and then you'll come back to you, Mr. Anderson, and you'll get a minute at the end as well. One more time, what is the most pressing infrastructure need in the 3rd Congressional District, and how will you work to address it?
All right, well, that's an excellent question. Infrastructure is a key part of my campaign. I believe that to have a healthy district, when you analyze districts and cities and countries all around the world that are successful, you have good infrastructure, you have good health care, and you have good education. And those three things together make a successful district, attractive to investors and corporate growth. So the most pressing need is probably all of the above. And that's pretty vague, but I'll sharpen it up since I get a minute at the end. One of the legislative packages that my team has been putting together is an infrastructure package that will encourage federal backing of municipal bonds, and thereby encouraging public-private partnerships to boost infrastructure in all the pressing needs. And I'll elaborate since I am at 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Andrews?
Yeah, I would say the I-10 bridge in Lake Charles is probably the most pressing thing in my mind. It's way outdated. It needs to be torn down and new and built. And the way I would work on that is I would reach out, excuse me, to delegates, you know, all the way from Texas to New Orleans, because it is a corridor that's very important for transportation and shipment. And then the other thing is dredging the ship channels, and Congressman Higgins has done a good job on that and securing funds for that. But I think that those type of funds need to be dedicated so that the ports can count on those funds.
Thank you. Mr. Guillory?
We have several key infrastructure projects in the district: connecting I-49 South, replacing the bridge in I-10 in Lake Charles, and drainage. As far as our ship channels, we'll all agree that dredging our ship channels is a vital need, but we need to maybe stress the importance of this a little bit more, make it more permanent solutions. There's no reason why we have to go and beg for dollars every single year to dredge our ports. It's one of the few areas where the federal government puts in $1 and gets at least $1 back. So I know we can do better in that regard. How we accomplish that, I agree, I'll piggyback a little bit. And we make all politics local. You know, take the I-49 South connector, for example. There is a vital importance to Arkansas, to Missouri, and all through our country. The I-10 bridge, God forbid that ever fall. You don't think it'd be important to Alabama and to Mississippi, to Florida. So we can do this. We make all politics local. We partner with our colleagues in Congress, and we make things happen. It's time to stop talking about it. It's time to start doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Guillory. Mr. Higgins?
The two most significant infrastructure projects for the 3rd District are, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, I-49 corridor completion and the I-10 bridge at Lake Charles. Both projects require local and state cooperative efforts to come up with one plan, one footprint. This is what has never happened. The challenging thing for the I-49 corridor is not the broad expanse of highways. Most of the highway systems have been built to interstate standards. It's the actual footprint, the actual project of the completion through Acadiana, through the Lafayette area specifically. There's a lot of private property. So any congressional office should work closely, as mine has, with the local elected officials and executive in the state, the home state, in this case Baton Rouge, to come to one footprint, one project. We get that done for I-49, we'll get the funding. Same thing for the bridge in Lake Charles.
Thank you. Ms. Methvin?
And I agree with everyone up here about how critical the challenge is for us to address the I-10 bridge and I-49 as well. One of the biggest challenges, of course, to the question of the footprint of the I-49 connector is that the route through Lafayette has a lot of problems, including there's a basic Superfund site right in the path of that corridor. My son, my younger son, works in urban planning, and he posted an article 3 years ago about how many cities who have put up interstates in the middle, the heart of their communities, have realized what a terrible mistake it was and how much blight it brought, and they have backed off of that. But I have just a few seconds left. None of this is going to happen if we don't address our critical coastal issues and the fact that we're on the front lines of a global challenge with the loss of our land.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, and I'm going to say that our coastal restoration project is probably the most important. But however, I do not believe that the Coastal Master Plan is realistic. I don't believe that it's attacking the source of the problem. I mean, you're not doing anything to correct the problem that we did with the levees in 1930s. Also, you're not doing anything to stop the gas and oil industry for taking the reserves from under the state, which is causing sediment compactions. And when that oil is removed, it's leaving a void. And when that the flood water goes on top, it is compacting the land on top. So that's causing sea levels to rise. Also, with the natural sea level process and the rising from a natural process from the melting of the glaciers and the polar caps. So you put that together with what's going on with the sediment compaction and the levees, and we're seeing Louisiana literally sinking. So I believe we're in a cold red situation. I believe that our coastal restoration project is most important, and we must attack that first.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Okay, and now we return to Mr. Anderson for 1 more minute.
Yes, and to continue where I was speaking, a bipartisan, and as Mr. Guillory hinted at, we need to work together with all the congressmen along the Gulf region. The I-10 doesn't just matter to Lake Charles and to Lafayette. It matters to all these states. So a bipartisan effort to work with industry to finance all of this infrastructure, all these infrastructure projects, to put it front and center, to give it priority by, instead of talking about what we can do, or maybe, we will actually give them legislation and we say, this is what we're going to do. We'll get the 10 congressmen that are along the Gulf Coast here and the other 10 over there, and everybody gets together, and then it becomes more of a priority for Congress, and then actually bring something home by working together. Mr. Guillory and I happen to be good friends, so I know bipartisanship can work. We can be bipartisan, and it doesn't have to be a Republican plan or a Democratic plan. I want a plan for the 3rd District of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We have now finished one complete round. No one has had a rebuttal yet. Let me remind you that if one of your fellow members of your panel gets a question that you would like to address as well, you can say, could I rebut that, please? And then you can jump in, and so you get a minute to weigh in on a particular question. So if your question goes to someone else, you can do something about it. You get to do that one time. So now we start round 2. We're going to start with Mr. Guillory.
All right. Let's go with the economy, Q4.
Question 4. What is your plan for helping the nearly 1 in 5 residents of the 3rd Congressional District who live in poverty? Would your solution involve raising the federal minimum wage?
We have got to get our economy rolling. You know, I support the tax cuts. I believe that on a macro level, our national economy is booming. I love the fact that we have American businesses staying home and incentivizing other businesses to come here, but we are hurting down here in the South Louisiana. We're hurting in Southwest Louisiana. Our unemployment in Louisiana is higher than the national average, and we have an out-migration in jobs. As a congressman, I think it's vital, I know it's vital, and I'll do this as a congressman, is I will partner with local leaders to see what can we do to diversify the economy. Diversifying the economy brings more jobs. More jobs has the ability for other folks to work, and that's what I want. I want every Louisianian that wants to work to have a job to go to work, and we can do that. It's not just about focusing on the national economy, and that's what I believe we're lacking here in our current voice. You know, oil and gas is vital. You know, we used to have over 200 oil wells where we can tap in, and now we have 56 in this state. And I know that we can't snap our fingers and make the oil rigs come back and drill more holes in Louisiana, but we need to start trying. And we need to start we need not to just rely on oil and gas. We need to rely on diversifying the economy. I don't care if it's a moon landing gear company. I want them back here in Lafayette, Louisiana, Acadia Parish, Calcasieu Parish, you pick one. So I think it starts with partnership, and I think it starts with diversifying the economy. As far as minimum wage goes, you know, I think if we need to come to a point where we realize that we have 50 sovereign states, and minimum wage in Salem, New Hampshire, and Salem, Oregon is not the same it will not have the same effect on Lafayette, Louisiana, and citizens in Calcasieu and Lake Charles. If we can develop a plan, and I'd like to talk to my colleagues in Congress to develop a plan to make this as local of an issue as we possibly can, and that will have a more tailored solution across our country, not just in Louisiana.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Guillory. Next question is for Mr. Higgins. Which one would you pick?
National security, first question, please.
National security, question 1. What do you see as Congress's top national security priority?
Restoring a military that had crumbled under the previous administration. We had up to 70% of our nation's planes could not fly. The lack of investment in the American military compared to domestic programs was perhaps well-intentioned by the previous administration. Granted, you know, we're all Americans, we have ideological differences, we have opinions, but there's only one opinion when it comes to the American military might across the world. When the world calls 911, they're calling us. And by mandate, the American military is commanded to be able to perform, to defend and fight 2 major wars in 2 separate theaters and still defend the homeland. We could not do that. So much of the investment from last year's fiscal year and this year's has been to restore our military back to the prominence and the superiority that's called for peace across the world. You know, we're in service to our fellow man one way or the other. That's reflective of our Christian compassion. In order to bring peace to the world, America must be strong. Investment to restore our military based upon its deterioration over the last decade would be, I would say, Congress's top national security priority.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Ms. Methvin, it is your question.
I'll take education and workforce, question 1.
Okay. Question 1. Businesses across America are facing a middle skills gap or a shortage of qualified workers for jobs that require a credential beyond high school, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. What steps should Congress take to close the skills gap and grow our economy?
Well, in general, education is critical if we're going to have a thriving economy here or anywhere else. Louisiana, our high school graduation rate is 6 points below the national average. I think it's 76 or 78. The national average is 84. For African American students, it's even 6 points below that, 12 points below the national average. We have got to invest in public education, and we have to make secondary, post-secondary education affordable. We are saddling too many of our students with crushing student loan debt, and that would include these kids, the middle skills gap problem that's being asked about. So I think supporting education, making sure that federal and taxpayer dollars go to support public education and are not diverted into private profit is one of the key things that we have to address. And here in Louisiana, I think we only have 10% of our high school students that are ready to move on to STEM jobs that involve engineering and science, math, and we have got to do better on that. So here in Louisiana, we need to make sure that our public schools are strong. My two sons are proud graduates of Lafayette High School. They each earned full scholarships to college because of the great education that they received, and I want to see our public schools continue to do great things and not to have funds pulled from them so that only wealthy kids get good educations. We cannot have a thriving business economy if we take that tack. So we've got to all invest in our kids, no matter where their zip code is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Methvin. Mr. Thomas, your pick.
I'm going to go with question 4 for education and workforce.
Okay. Question 4, Americans owe nearly $1.3 trillion in student loan debt. What steps should Congress take to help those struggling to repay student loans?
Well, because education is not really in our Constitution, I don't believe that Congress gets involved enough in what's going on with our education system. I believe that we do have the capabilities of helping our students out at the college level. That's why I believe that we should have some type of form of free tuition for colleges, for students that excel in their freshman and sophomore year. I believe we can give them their junior and their senior year tuition free. Now, when you start talking about these type of issues with that and Medicare for all, people call you a socialist and they believe that where you're going to get the money from. And I believe that we have to hold our federal agencies accountable for the money they do receive, such as, let's say the Overseas Contingency Fund. This is a fund since 2003. $64 billion has been put in this fund, and no accountability, no paper trail. And if you add that up from then to now, you're talking about $1.6 trillion that could have went to education, also for Medicare for all. So I believe that the children are our future, and we got to invest in what our future is. So I suggest that we take some of them funds that's being wasted in our federal agencies and divert that to our education system.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Anderson.
Yes. Why don't we go for national security, Q2, please?
Question 2. Should Congress impose sanctions against Saudi Arabia over the case of missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi?
Topical question. That's a good one. As you probably know, in the news today, the $100 million payment from Saudi Arabia just came over into our coffers. This one is probably a matter of not having all of the facts, but I do believe the United States should strive to be as we once were, which is a world leader in human rights. And I think that has fallen by the wayside under this administration. We may be stronger national security-wise, but I think we are in danger of losing the mantle of the beacon of freedom that we used to be. I saw a chart a couple weeks ago where we've dropped to 21st in world democracies. We are no longer the freest country in the world. So should Congress impose, I'll answer yes. That's the short version before I get all political and long-winded. Too late. Yeah, I do believe that we should hold countries accountable, and horribly torturing this journalist, as was reported to happen, there have to be repercussions on the international stage. I believe that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Andrus?
Yeah, I think I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to go potpourri question 1.
Okay. Question 1. And it's the daily double. Okay, so everybody gets a shot at this one. What is the one policy issue you would immediately work with members of the opposite party on?
Well, we kind of already covered that, the I-10 corridor, infrastructure. Yeah, you got me on the spot here. I mean, my main policy issue is the deficit. We have got to find ways to cut spending. The deficit is just ballooning. It's going to affect us all. It's going to affect us all very badly. The Fed's raising interest rates. That means that the interest on the debt is going up. We have a very serious problem. So we need to figure out ways that we're going to cut, and we're going to have to cut across the board, or we're going to have to make some hard decisions. Social Security, military, somewhere along the way, we're going to have to make some hard decisions and get the debt down.
Okay. Same question, 1 minute, Mr. Guillory.
We have got to balance the federal budget. I completely agree. Our national debt is exceeding $21 trillion. I have children. I have 3 children. Everyone in this room either has children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. You care about our country. I care about our country. What country do we want to hand to them? It can't be a debt-ridden country. This year alone, we're going to spend roughly $310 billion a year on interest payments alone on our public debt. We don't get a new bridge with that. We don't get new roads. We don't get better education. We have got to get our spending under control. And with all due respect, Congressman, I disagree with you voting to increase our national debt 3 times. On your first vote on any major legislation, you voted to increase our debt specifically over $500 billion. There's nothing conservative and there's nothing fiscally responsible about that.
Thank you, Mr. Guillory. Mr. Higgins?
Well, to work with my colleagues across the aisle, there has to be a willingness for such a relationship to move forward. There's many pieces of bipartisan legislation that we passed in 115th Congress, and all of them had some commonalities regarding they were sort of non-controversial, and yet we live in a political climate wherein we have witnessed the hard left turn of my colleagues across the aisle and a great deal of obstructionist posturing. So we can wish, that there was a great bipartisan will and trend within Congress, and I'm certainly a participant in that. But there's the reality that there's obstructionism happening in Washington, D.C., and that's unfortunate and tragic. We should all question this as Americans.
Mr. Higgins, you were directly referenced by Mr. Guillory, so you have 1 minute to respond to him if you choose.
Thank you, sir. It's not my nature to respond to attacks like that, and I'm subject to many. The office that we've established has been recognized as one of the most conservative offices in Washington, D.C. It's absurd to say otherwise. We have voted to advance a conservative agenda. If we needed to take 80 yards in a field goal, we'll do that. If we couldn't get 100 yards in a touchdown. I'm completely endorsed and supported by the most conservative elements in the country. And I voted begrudgingly twice no against my colleagues and contrary to the president's wishes on 2 major appropriations bills. If you understand the way appropriations work, which is a complex mechanism, then it's much easier to grasp how challenging it is when you should have 12 appropriations votes when these are compressed into omnibuses or minibuses. And in deference to my colleague, we'll talk more about it over a cold beer.
Ms. Methvin?
And I'd like to be in on that beer thing. It sounds good to me. I think we have seen the conservative agenda is all about serving corporations and billionaires and not about being fiscally responsible. So I want to get that in. The policy issue that I want to immediately work on with members of the opposing party is health care. Healthcare is the most critical issue, the kitchen table issue in this district and across the country. People are more afraid to become ill than almost anything else because of the threat of bankruptcy and saddling themselves, their families with incredible debt. There are efforts right now to take away coverage for pre-existing conditions, which is going to be devastating for 40% of the people that live in this district. So I know that bipartisanship can happen because I saw it happen when I worked for Congressman Long. We had 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the Louisiana delegation, and they met regularly. They worked together for Louisiana, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, same question.
Well, I agree with all my colleagues on everything that they just said, but I'm going to go out and say that we need to work on our trade policies. We got too much outsourcing going on in our country where businesses are leaving United States and going to other countries because we are not, we're procrastinating too much on what the future is, and we're not bringing the products to the table anymore like we used to. And I do believe that we can make the trade deal with Mexico and Canada a lot better. Well, we can do more things to innovate ingenuity. So I believe outsourcing is one of those things that we can't be polarized on. We have to bring those issues to the table. We have to bring those solutions on the table, and we have to answer those questions, and we have to work together so we can see America be on top and on the pedestal that we used to be on. Right now, those issues are number one, so we should work on outsourcing.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Okay, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, well, more so than a policy, it's been referenced by the dialogue we've had here, what I would like to see more of in Congress, and the first thing I'd want to work on is bipartisanship. It's cooperation, it's statesmanship. Politicians used to work deals to get their agendas done, and now with the influence of corporate money in politics, everybody has a preset position that has nothing to do with what they do or don't believe. We were all in the back room together. We all got along famously, and I find it hard to believe that we can't go into the House of Representatives and find a way to work together. So that's my long political answer. The short version: healthcare.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And we're going to end where we started with Mr. Andrus. You've got 1 minute.
Yeah, just going back to the debt. I think while bipartisanship is absolutely essential for some issues, the tit for tat is kind of built into the system so that some things move forward slowly. But concerning the debt, if we're passing bills that has a lot of pork and corporate welfare, if we're passing military bills that's giving money to Saudi Arabia to refuel to bomb Yemen, it's just not going to happen. We have to say no to those.
Okay, thank you. So we've finished round two. Once again, remind you that no one's used their rebuttal power yet, so you're keeping your powder dry, but this is your last chance as we begin.
Can we use that to add to a question that was covered by a colleague up here, or must it be a rebuttal?
Yeah, if a question is asked to someone else and you want to weigh in on that question, then you kind of raise your hand and say, I'd like to rebut, and you speak.
I'd like to address the question that Her Honor addressed regarding workforce development.
Okay, let's hear it.
The challenge we face here for workforce development is incredible. It's across the country. For the first time since these things have been measured, there are more jobs available in America than there are unemployed workers. It's quite a reflection that we should consider very seriously, that we have manufacturers in South Louisiana that can't get welders, man. Now, when I went to school, when I was born in 1961, when in junior high school and before in grade school, we learned trades. And gradually as a nation, we have shifted away from the respect of a certificate degree education. And I believe this should be restored. We've gradually forced our youngsters into four-year degrees. I believe federal funds should be leveled out regarding education. There's no reason you can't progress, my friend Ramesh, from a certificate degree in welding to a graduate degree at UL. But let us begin at the certificate degree to fill the workforce challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Okay, so now we'll begin round three, and thank you for using that rebuttal, and you broke the ice, so maybe it'll encourage someone else to do that. We are going to return to Congressman Higgins for this next question, so pick a question to begin round three.
National security, third question, please.
National security, third question. Do you believe it's necessary to build a wall along the U.S.'s southern border with Mexico?
We have 1,954 miles of border, southern border. 100% of the southern portion of that border is controlled and impacted by criminal cartels. Nothing comes across our southern border criminally without being touched by the cartel. We have about 700 miles of physical barrier right now. I've scouted it all. I've scouted the entire 1,954-mile border. I've talked to the officers and troops on the ground that are actually responsible for securing our sovereignty along our southern border. So what's required is not the Great Wall of China. No one is suggesting that we put a 30-foot wall on top of a 200-foot cliff. The topography of the land determines what's needed. The densities of populations north and south of our sovereign southern border is what determines what is needed and where. We need about 900 miles of improved permanent structure in order to allow the Border Patrol to do its job. What's its job? To detect an illegal crossing. This is where technology comes in. To delay that illegal crossing, this is where permanent barriers come in that are very difficult to cross. And anyone that says you can defeat a 30-foot wall with a 40-foot ladder has never climbed a 30-foot wall with a 40-foot ladder. It's quite challenging, will certainly delay a criminal crossing. The next part of the Border Patrol's mission is to respond. You detect the illegal crossing, you delay the illegal crossing, and you respond to the illegal crossing. This is where manpower, vehicles, all-weather roads, etc. are called for. So I support giving our law enforcement agencies everything they need to complete their job and restore sovereignty to the borders of our nation.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins.
I like to rebuttal.
Okay, Mr. Thomas.
I disagree. I was in San Diego. I was United States Navy, and I've seen tunnels being built while the wall is being built and while fences are being built. So they're professional tunnel diggers over there, and they buy houses just to dig tunnels, just to come over to America. I believe that we have to get a better relationship with Mexico, and we have to understand that our infrastructure is in a situation right now where we could come up with a national plan, a national workforce that actually helps our infrastructure and build our infrastructure from coast to coast. And I believe that we can make, we can incorporate immigrants with Americans to actually get all this work done that we have done, that we need to get done in our country. So I believe that the immigrants are actually a blessing in disguise in some type of ways. We can't put Americans second when it comes to that issue, but we can incorporate a workforce plan that makes it so we're not wasting money on immigration. We can actually make money from immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Turning, next question to Ms. Methvin.
Potpourri, question 2.
Okay. Should the U.S. move closer to a single-payer, government-managed health care or further away?
I advocate the United States developing a Medicare for All system because we are paying $50 trillion, going to pay $50 trillion for health care in the United States over the next 10 years, which is about twice as much per person as any other wealthy country in the world pays. We have far worse outcomes than other countries. We have a lower life expectancy. We have sky-high rates of maternal and infant mortality, higher rates of diabetes, high blood pressure. We are not getting our money's worth out of the system. And two things that we know: we're paying a tremendous amount of money in administrative fees that could be avoided if we had a single payer system. And we're paying a tremendous amount for our prescription drug medications because our Congress and this administration has blocked the ability of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate with prescription drug companies to get down the cost of prescriptions. If we move to a single payer system in the next 10 years, we will be paying approximately $40 trillion for that care. So we would save $10 trillion. We're paying already for Medicare, Medicaid, veterans care, and in our premiums, our deductibles, our co-pays, we're paying a huge amount of money. And this is creating incredible suffering for people in the United States. So the first thing we need to do is undo the sabotage that's been done to the ACA during this administration and make sure that people with pre-existing conditions do not lose their coverage. And then the next thing we have to do is to start working towards a a healthcare plan that works for everyone and that gives everyone coverage.
Thank you, Ms. Methvin.
Dr. Cross, I'd like to rebut.
Okay, rebut. Mr. Guillory.
The answer to this question is not to increase the size, scope, and power of the federal government. One solution is to increase the power of the private sector. You know, right now we have 50 sovereign states, and there's no reason why we talked about a wall right now, okay? Well, we need to tear down these walls around each of our 50 states in healthcare. There's no reason, if you have a plan in Minnesota that's better for your family or better for yourself, that you shouldn't have access to. We need to partner with each individual 50 departments of insurance and find a way. Better access is with the private sector, not the federal government. If I had to put my faith in the hands of the federal government or the private sector, I'll put my hands in the faith in the hands of the private sector any day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Thomas, your question.
Okay, I'm going to also go for potpourri. I'm going to go with question number 5.
Question 5. How important is political experience to representing the 3rd Congressional District? What experience do you bring that separates you from the field?
Well, I believe that when you look at the experience and you look at the problems that we're having today, the experienced ones are the ones that have us in this predicament that we're in. And right now, I believe that the leadership for District 3 is maliciously harmful to the progress and proficiency that we desire as a state. I was in the Navy, and I excelled in the Navy. I did radar, tactical data systems, and I was secret control clerk for my command, and I've seen a lot. And I believe that Louisiana's going through growing pains that I've seen before. So I believe that my experience in the Navy, my experience in, I've seen some things that California's going through, like with the medical marijuana situation, that I see Louisiana just getting to. So I believe from my experience, I can bring some of that to the table, and I can also give some information on what I've seen in the past, and I can help Louisiana get through this growing pains and meet the future where it stands, because I believe that situations like the marijuana crop should be legalized throughout the state, because we're a crop state, and marijuana is #1 in the country. So I believe we move marijuana up on a list as a crop state. I believe that we can see a lot of progress and proficiency that we need to advance into the state that we need to be. Louisiana can be the blueprint for the rest of the states that's going our direction. We don't have to be number 51. We do have the capabilities to rise up out of the abyss and be the best state in the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Okay, we go to you, Mr. Anderson. Which one would you like?
Dozing off there, sorry. I didn't mean that as a rebuke. It's hard to stand up here stiff. Education and workforce. Second question, please.
Question 2. If elected, how will you work to ensure that post-secondary education is affordable to all who need it?
That's a darn good question. That is a darn good question. And a couple of my colleagues have touched upon it, that I came from the working class. I am one who has worked in the trades for the last 20 years or so. Before that, I did some IT and stuff. So I do put high value on my fellow workers who do the welding, who do the pipe fitting, who do the plumbing. And sometimes just a 2-year degree or a certificate is all that's required. And then once you get into those fields, there's nothing stopping you from getting further education. But yes, I do believe that we should put an emphasis on not just K through 12, but K through 14, at least the first 2 years post-secondary, especially in the modern world where your biggest corporations are Google and Facebook, and we need a lot more technical skills in the STEM fields. We need more students. Both of my kids went engineering, thank goodness. They didn't want to be broke like Dad. So how would I work to, well, you got to get bipartisan support, as anything. We have to make sure all of Congress agrees, or at least the majority of the vote, that it's not a Democrat or a Republican issue. It's an American issue. We need our kids better education. Right now, we have a crippling student debt problem, which is turning people off from higher education, because you get a 4-year degree in psychology and then you work, I hear Starbucks pays well, but it's still not what they went to school for. So I do believe in higher education, but I also believe in associate's degrees. I believe in the trades. You know, one of the people I know who makes the most money is an electrician. You know, union work is good work. There's nothing wrong with it. I was a driller myself, and while I may not be as fancily educated as my colleagues here, I am rather erudite. So. What does that mean? I'll write you a crib sheet later. Yeah, I do believe we need.
Thank you,
and I'm
Mr.
done.
Anderson. I would be remiss as the Associate Dean of Liberal Arts to point out, if I did not point out, that a psychology degree is quite a good degree, and we tend to place nearly every psychology graduate.
I was trying to pick on a good degree. I'm trying to pick on a good
No
one.
picking on psychology.
Liberal arts degree. Liberal arts.
Well, no picking on liberal arts here. Okay, you can talk about it. We'll talk about that later. I think I'm going to have a rebuttal right here. Okay.
I got to stay after school.
All right, Mr. Andrus, it's your pick.
Okay, let's go economy, question 5.
Question 5. Other countries have established local content laws that give domestic businesses first consideration in providing services and materials to the oil and gas industry, or establish minimum requirements for project work to happen within the country. Would you be in favor of Congress passing new local content laws here?
No, probably not. I tend to think that we should keep the federal government out of as much as possible, and so these type of things would probably be handled better at the state and local level. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrus.
Can I use my one rebuttal there?
Of course.
No offense. Yeah. While it's ironic to me, the Libertarian Party in general, and I love Aaron, we get along great, but the idea of auditioning for a federal job while being in favor of basically getting rid of government amuses the hell out of me. All I would have to say is that the federal government, we are a society, and as such, not every decision affects every one of us, but it affects the body as a whole. And so I do believe that some regulation is good regulation. And that's one where a congressman would come in handy, I would think, saying, yes, we want to push our local companies. You know, we have out in the Gulf, there's many drilling companies. One of them is BP that was responsible for that big spill a few years ago. It's a foreign company. Maybe favoritism should be given to local American businesses first, certainly on a case-by-case basis, and especially when Louisiana's economy is struggling.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Guillory, it's your turn.
Let's take national security, Q4.
Q4. Is China or Russia a bigger threat to American national security?
Well, there's no topic that's more personal to me and more important to me than national security, because we can have this debate about education, infrastructure, businesses, and roads. If we don't protect our homeland, if we don't protect our people, and not to be too dramatic, but if there is a nuclear bomb that hits our country, all of that will be moot. So whatever it takes to defend our country, whatever resources our troops have, I just want you to know, as your congressman, I will do everything I can to give those resources to our men and women, our brave men and women of our armed services. China or Russia, I think they're both serious threats, and I think they pose different threats in different areas. I think cybersecurity is huge. I think in this last election, I do believe that there was meddling. The president was on an interview this weekend that said both China and Russia meddled with our election. I tend to believe him, and I know that he's privileged to more intelligence than we are. But as a congressman, I want our intelligence agencies, I want our men and women of the military to have every resource they have, every gun they need, every computer they need, every tank, every Humvee, and I know Congressman Higgins agrees with me on that. But there's something deeper here, and I have some time left, so I need to bring this up, because I'll be honest with you, as a challenger, I'm not going to have the money as our incumbent does to get on TV. You'll hear me on the radio maybe a little bit and on social media, but there's a lot of members in our district Congressman, that don't realize you do not live in our district. And I'm not attacking you when I do this. I'll have a beer with you any day of the week, but it's not going to change my opinion that we shouldn't balance the budget or get flood insurance under control. But living in our district is vital. When I go to the store to get eggs and milk or whatnot, I'm going to Nunu's or Helo's or Rouse's, and it's healthy to get an earful. So I have a question. I know who I'm going to vote for this year. I know who I'm going to vote for Congress. Congressman, who are you going to vote for Congress?
Okay, you're finished, Mr. Guillory. You've been directly mentioned in his comment. Mr. Higgins, would you like to respond?
Well, I'm not from China or Russia. My heritage is 200 years deep, South Louisiana. The Constitution clearly states that elected representatives in the People's House, in which I'm honored to serve, shall be selected by the people of the several states. The sovereign lines that were recognized by our founding fathers were state lines. Our founding fathers clearly stated that as a congressman, we would represent cultures and communities. I represent the culture and communities that the Higgins family has lived within for 200 years. And it's somewhat personally offensive to me to suggest otherwise. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Okay, now we're going on to the lightning round. So this is going to be 10 seconds per candidate. So you're going to have a chance very quickly to say kind of yes, no, etc. So don't wax eloquently. Just give us your best shot, okay? We're going to start with Ms. Methvin. So you will get the very first one. 10 seconds, please. President Trump's tax cuts, good for America, bad for America?
Bad for America and bad for average working people. This has created a huge problem in our country, and we need to undo it.
Okay, Mr. Thomas?
Bad for America. I believe that it gives breaks to the top 1% and doesn't really take in consideration of what the bottom percent is really going through as a nation.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Loaded question. It's good for part of America, it's bad for part of America. I do think the tax burden should be shared, which is lacking from that bill, so it needs to be augmented.
Okay, Mr. Andrews?
Excellent. Tax cut, deregulation, fantastic. Could go more. The only other thing we need to do, though, is cut the spending. We have to get spending under control.
Thank you. Mr. Guillory?
Completely agree. Great for America, but we must get spending under control.
Okay, Mr. Higgins?
Completely supported the plan. It was wonderful for America. It has reignited the American economy. Our GDP for the first time in many, many decades, we're looking at over 4% growth in 3 quarters in a row here.
Okay, thank you. We've reached everybody. Let's, this one goes to you first, Mr. Thomas. Federal budget deficits and the national debt. Big problem or small problem?
Okay, all right, it was kind of flickering there. Federal budget deficits and the national debt, big problem.
Or small
Or
problem.
small problem. Definitely the deficit is a big problem. I think we're taking on more debt than the country is needed, and we need to focus more on economic development to raise.
Thank you,
revenue.
Mr. Thomas. Mr. Anderson?
Deficits are a big problem. The national debt, we carry a big credit card. So the deficit, we need to get spending under control. I agree with my colleagues.
Okay, Mr. Andrews?
Yeah, huge problem. My #1 priority in Congress would be to address that issue.
Okay, Mr. Guillory?
We have to get the deficit down. In 10 years, it's my understanding we're going to spend more on our interest payments than discretionary spending. Cut spending, cut spending.
Okay, Mr. Higgins?
The national debt and annual deficit spending is a tremendous problem. I support a balanced budget amendment and the expansion of the American economy. You'll never tax your way out of this thing. We have to grow the economy.
Ms. Methvin?
It's a huge problem, and I'm surprised to hear Congressman Higgins say otherwise. He voted for the massive tax cut that benefited corporations
Thank you,
and
Ms.
also
Methvin.
for the spending bill.
Next question. This one goes to, let's see, who started the last one? Mr. Thomas started the last one, so I think we go to Mr. Anderson down there. Okay. Interference in American elections. Are we doing enough to prevent this or not?
No, obviously not. And matter of fact, Congress just voted against spending to increase security to prevent such a thing from happening again.
Okay, Mr. Andrews?
No, that's a vital interest to every American citizen that needs to be addressed.
Okay, Mr. Guillory?
I do trust our federal government in this regard. I do trust our executive. I do believe that we shouldn't take it lightly, and we have to continue to investigate ways that we can do better.
Okay, Mr. Higgins?
Yes, it's a tremendous problem, but we are using all of our assets to fight it. It's just not going to stop. It didn't begin in this last election cycle. It began long ago.
Okay, Ms. Methvin?
We're not doing enough, and also the attacks on our special counsel and the Department of Justice in trying to get to the bottom of it are a disservice to the country.
Okay. Mr. Thomas?
No, we're not doing enough, and I think that our President Trump, threw us under the bus when he sided with President Putin over our intel agency.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and this one goes first to Mr. Andrus. The press, friend or enemy of the people?
It's a friend of the people. I mean, they may have liberal bias and all this, but the foundation, the First Amendment is the foundation to the First Amendment is the press.
Okay, Mr. Guillory?
Between those two choices, I choose friend. I am glad to hear that we're looking and seeking more objectivity in the press, but it's definitely a friend.
Mr. Higgins?
American media has a power to be a friend or an enemy to the American people, and they manifest as both quite effectively.
Okay. Ms. Methvin?
Free press is critical to our democracy. So no, in no way, shape, or form are they the enemy of the country.
Mr. Thomas?
The press is our friend, and anytime you want to do an interview with the big man, give me a call.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Anderson?
Obviously, the press is a friend, especially since they're all president. We're not going to talk bad about them while they're here. No, I believe in the First Amendment.
Okay, and our last lightning round question begins with Mr. Guillory. Term limits for members of Congress, yes or no?
I 100% absolutely support term limits for all federally elected officials.
Mr. Higgins?
The Founding Fathers gave us term limits. They're called elections. It's certainly something for healthy debate we should engage in, but we should not change our Constitution lightly.
Thank you. Ms. Methvin?
Term limits, the problem with them is that by the time someone really understands how to be effective in the job, then they are kicked out. So that is a problem, but I also see elections we have got to get dark money out of that.
Mr. Thomas?
I think term limits are necessary. What that year is, I think we can come to some type of resolution for that, but I believe that it's going to allow people to do their job and not make it a career.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Anderson?
As the Congressman said, we do have term limits. They're called elections, and as I agree with Ms. Methvin, you take dark money out, let the people elect their representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed, but I agree with the congressman that the best term limit is by the will of the people.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of the lightning round. Thank you for just using those 10 seconds there. Now we are going to go into closing remarks, and we're going to start with Congressman Higgins. There's going to be 1 minute per candidate, starting with
Thank you, Pearson. And thank you for being a wonderful moderator, so you've been very kind. I would just like to say to this gathered crowd of amazing Americans that I've been struck at the honesty of Madam and the gentleman that stand up here with me. This is a room full of winners, man. There's no losing this thing. As long as Americans we can gather with love and respect for each other and share variances of ideologies and ideas in an open forum like this. So I commend my colleagues for the courage of their convictions, the honesty of their statements, and I commend all of you, my fellow Louisiana citizens and Americans, for attending this evening. It shows that you really care about the future of our country. God bless you, one and all.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Ms. Methvin?
Thank you, and thank you, Pearson, for hosting this tonight. It was delightful, and I compliment all of my colleagues up here as well, and it was a delight to be with everyone. What's at stake in this election is the moral basis of this country. We are really facing a question of what America stands for. The divisiveness, the bigotry that has come out in the national dialogue does not serve any of us. And also economically, the hollowing out of the middle class that has resulted from some of the economic policies that have been followed are not good for business, and they're not good for people. So we're going in the wrong direction, and we need to work together as Americans, not Republicans, not Democrats, but together to address these difficult problems that we have and restore America to a place where we are admired in the world.
Thank you, Ms. Methvin. Mr. Thomas.
Yes, I would like to thank one Acadiana for this event. It was very nice. I want to also end it by saying that we're in a code red situation, and we can't gamble with our future anymore in Louisiana. Right now, it's like a bathtub full of water and the faucet is on, and we got a bucket and a mop trying to mop up the floor without turning the faucet off. So we have to come to some realization of what's going on. We have to save our coast, we have to save our state, and realize that there's a dire need right now to save Louisiana, and I want to be the one to go to Washington and bring some real solutions to the table that's realistic.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Anderson.
Yes, I would also like to thank you, Pearson and One Acadiana, for hosting us, and thank you all for coming, as the Congressman pointed out. This is American democracy at work. We're standing up here, we all registered and qualified for an election. You're all here to pick one. Whether or not you pick me is immaterial, although please pick me. What I would like to see out of this process on my behalf and perhaps across the country, just maybe we could all get a little bit better. Let's stop blaming the other guy for making the problems. Make your choices, decide which way you want the country to keep going, pick the person you think will push in that direction, and then stand by your convictions. That's what I'd like to see, and that's what I have seen out of engaging all the voters, and it's actually been a lot of fun, so right on, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Andrus.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me here. It's absolutely enjoyable. My number one priority is the debt. I believe that a fiscally conservative, constitutionally limited government is the best government. The government that governs least governs best. And I appreciate everybody's comments and feedback. And I didn't get a chance to respond to his question, but is there anything that Congress does well?
Yes.
I disagree.
All right, thank you. Mr. Guillory.
Dr. Cross, and to my alma mater, UL Lafayette, and to everybody here, thank you. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for having me. Thank you to my fellow candidates here. I am humbled. I'm humbled over the last year and a half. Is that a selfie? Over the last year and a half, I've learned a lot. I've traveled all 9 parishes and precincts of St. Landry as well, and I'm just humbled. I love our area. This is my home. This is where I call home. This is where my wife calls home. No one person has all the answers. I think everybody will agree with that. And I don't have a record in Congress yet. But I do have a record as a father, as a husband. I do have a record as an officer in the military, as an enlisted man, as a volunteer coach, as a business owner, as an attorney, in doing what I say I'm going to do. And I promise you this, there will never be a day that I take for granted in being your congressman, and there will never be a day that I don't fight for our best interests in Congress on our behalf, and I humbly ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this brings us towards the end, or to the end of tonight's discussion. We want to thank once again to the candidates and the members of their staff for being here tonight. We certainly want to wish you the best of luck on November 6th, and may the person with the most support win. We'd like to thank UL, and we'd like to thank the Picard Center for hosting this lovely and important event. We'd like to thank all the media that are here tonight helping us to cover it. We'd like to thank particularly One Acadiana for creating this opportunity and organizing this event. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. We'd like to remind you of 2 important events, Ballots Over Breakfast on October 25th and Ballots Over Breakfast 2 on November 29th. Registration is open at oneacadiana.org events. Do not forget to vote on November 6th. Make your voice count. And now please join me in applauding our candidates in this forum.